name's Sophie from Scrumbles Crafts, and this is the next video in my How To Crochet series. For today's tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to make a slipknot and a foundation chain. This is what will form the basis for many of my future tutorials and is also a key component in many blanket patterns. If we look at this blanket for example, it's the foundation chain that has determined the width of this blanket and is what we build upon to increase the length of our blanket. The length of your foundation chain is determined by a couple of different things. Firstly, how wide you want your blanket to be in the end, and also the type of stitch you're going to be using. In every foundation chain, you will have a number of stitches that correspond to a particular stitch pattern that you're using. So in the case of a ripple, each of these ripples corresponds to 14 chains. So you would first decide how many repeats you want of this ripple, and so it would be 14 times, in this case, 8. And then we would add on to that 3 more chains, and this corresponds to the very first stitch in our row. If, for example, we had something like a treble crochet, the treble crochet only has a single treble per chain. So in terms of our repeat, it would only be a repeat of 1. So in this case, we could have a repeat of 100 stitches, and then again we would add 3 for our very first stitch. Any good pattern should not only tell you how many chains you need in your foundation row to get the same dimensions of the blanket that they describe in the pattern, but they should also give you the formula for their foundation chain so that you can then vary the dimensions of your blanket if you want to. Whenever I give a tutorial for making a blanket or a particular stitch, I will always give you the formula for working out that foundation chain so that you can make it to the desired width that you would like. So now that we've covered the basic principles, it's time to make our foundation chain. So for today's tutorial I'm going to be using this paint box yarn, the Simply Aran weight, in colour 247. This is available from lovecrafts.com and I'll put a link in the description. I'm also going to be using a 5mm hook, so this is one of the Clover Armour hooks, and if you saw my Getting Started with Crochet video, you'll know that I especially like these hooks because they have a really nice soft handle which makes them really comfortable to hold, and they glide very effortlessly through the yarn. Again, I'll put a link in the description as to where you can find these. In terms of starting our foundation chain, we first need to make a slip knot. Now to do this, we wrap the yarn around our first finger, we then take the yarn and wrap it again, and this then goes behind that first loop. So if I do that again, so over that finger, wrapping round, and then what we do is we pull up this first loop here, put that over the back, and then we'll take up this loop. And then we've made our slip knot. We can then insert our hook, and to tighten this we'll just pull on the long length of yarn that's attached to the ball. Now don't pull this too tightly because we still want to be able to work through this loop. In terms of holding the yarn, there are a few different ways to do it, everybody has their own personal preference. This is how I like to hold the yarn. So first I'll put it over my first finger, I then trail the yarn across my palm and tuck it between my little finger and my ring finger. Now some people like to just hold it like this, so they just have it wrapped around this first finger and then they drape it over their palm. I find if I do that my tension is too loose, so this helps me just keep it that little bit tighter and gives me more control over the tension of my project. And tension will be very important because if you have too loose tension or too tight a tension, that will affect what you make in the end. So now we're ready to make our foundation chain. So to do this, we'll do what's called yarn over. Now by yarn over, and you'll hear this a lot in many tutorials and patterns and various videos, is you're going to move the hook away from you, underneath that yarn, and then as you're coming over you're going to turn it so that this hooked region here is facing downwards. You'll then catch the yarn with that hook and pull it through that slip knot that we just made. And there we've made our first chain. So let's try that again. So again we're going to yarn over by moving this hook away from us, turning it, and then pulling the yarn through, and then that's our next chain. Now we're going to keep doing this until our chain reaches our desired length. So for today's tutorial I'm just going to make 10 chains. So yarn over, turning the hook, pull through, yarn over, turning that hook, pull through. Now when making your foundation chain as well, particularly for blankets, it's very important that you have quite loose tension, because what can happen is if it's too tight in your foundation chain, when you then start to add in your rows, this can start to curve. If you find it quite hard to crochet loosely, I recommend making just your foundation chain with a larger hook. You can use either a hook that's a whole millimetre larger, or just go up by half a millimetre. So here we've got 5.5 and the 6mm. Again, the clover are more hooks. And this just helps to keep your foundation chain loose and the tension correct throughout your project. So if we just continue, so yarn over, pull through, and so you can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 chains. We don't count this on the hook itself, so we count directly beneath. So yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through again, and we're just going to keep doing this until we reach our desired length. Now something that you might find useful if you're making a really long chain, so sometimes if you're making a chain that's several hundred chains long, you can also use stitch markers to mark every so many chains. So for instance, we could use a stitch marker here to mark every 5 chains, so if we do lose count at any point, we don't have to count back very far to figure out where we are. So with these stitch markers, I just got these from Amazon. They're relatively inexpensive but very useful. So go 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5, and then I'm just going to put that in there. And so now I know where my 5 stitch point is. So if I do lose track, someone talks to me, as people inevitably do when you're counting, this helps you to keep track. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and I need just one more, and then I'll have my 10. And there we have our foundation chain. In my next tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to build upon this foundation chain and to double crochet into it. And then for the following tutorial, I'll be showing you how to treble crochet into it. In the meantime, if there are any other stitches or techniques you'd like to see, then leave me a note in the comments. Happy crocheting, and I'll see you next time.